Good evening and a warm welcome to you all to this English talk that's been conducted by the Guru Ayappan Temple of Brampton in Canada. So the topic of the talk today is what will four people say? So this is a very common phrase or a expression widely used. So in Tamil they used to say நாலு பேர் என்ன சொல்லுவாங்க, or in Hindi they say चार लोग क्या कहेंगे, or in Malayalam നാല് പേര് എന്ത് പറയും. So this is an expression that's been widely used in India and also in the Indian subcontinent. A lot of Pakistanis use it, Sri Lankans use it, and a lot of people who migrated from India to our other countries during the last 200 to 300 years started using this cultivation as well. So in this particular talk, what we're trying to do is we're trying to explore, we're going to dwell into the deeper Vedantic meaning behind the saying, what will four people say? So before we start any talk, what we typically do is we have a small prarthana or an invocation. And let's start this invocation with a small prayer. And the prayer goes like this, as you can see it on the screen. Sadashivasamarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmatacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Samasta Jana Kalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Sadgurum Brahma Vidwaram. The meaning of this wonderful invocation mantra is salutation to the lineage, starting with Lord Sadashiva, the Dakshinamurti, which you see on the top left corner, followed by the Guru Parampara of Lord Sri Shankaracharya, whom we call as Shankara Bhagavatpada, in the middle, and continuing up to the immediate teacher, Sri Puja Gurudev Swami Chinmayanandaji. So the topic today is what will four people say? So let's go down on a small memory lane of mine back into my childhood days. So when I was a little boy, when I used to just run around, create a lot of ruckus at home, my mom used to exasperatingly say, "What are you doing? How many times do I have to say the same thing again to you, again and again and again? Which part don't you understand? What will four people say?" So this particular question saying, what will four people say, just got so imbibed into my mind. And I was wondering, who are these four people? Then very often I do hear my mom saying it quite repeatedly. Then my grandmom said it once as well. Then I was talking to my neighbor and he mentioned to me that his mother used to say this to him all the time. So we both started looking for the answers. So who are these four people? These four people who have been constantly monitoring us. My mother and my neighbor's mom, my friend's mother were all comparing us to these four kids and they were equating us how we would behave from their perspective. So it was troubling to us who these four people are, who these people whom we couldn't find. We were wondering if they were fictitious people. So we started asking my parents and all stuff. And my dad, just jokingly said, "Oh, this is just a social expression. We just say it." But still then, I still couldn't grasp it. Then this usage we started sharing with our friends, and a lot of people started saying that every one of them have heard this particular saying in one way or the other. Then finally, in our school, a new teacher came up. And she was supposed to be very smart with all the answers, tacky answers for every question. So a couple of my friends said, "Hey, Shaji, why don't you go and ask this teacher this particular question? Since she's too smart, she would know the answer and she will let you know." So one day during the lunch break, I just walked into the teacher's room and asked the teacher, "Hey, do you know this expression? What does it say?" The teacher looked at me and said, "Hey, stupid boy, don't you have anything else to do? You're wasting my time and yours. Go back to your class and study." Again, my answers were not answered. My question was not answered. And this particular question, what will four people say, was in my mind for a very, very, very long time. Then years passed. Then, approximately when I was approximately 16 or 17 years of age, I joined Chinmaya Yuva Kendra. So, Chinmaya Yuva Kendra is a youth wing of Swami Chinmayananda's Chinmaya mission, and the English motto is harnessing the youth potential through dynamic spirituality. And if you look closely to the left side, the logo there, you see a wonderful Sanskrit wording there, which says, Nahi jnanena sadrisham pavitram vidyate. It comes from Gita chapter 4, shloka 38, and it has got a very beautiful meaning. It says there is nothing better than knowledge which can purify your mind, spirit, and soul. What a powerful word. So the Indian Sanatana Dharma was giving a lot of emphasis on knowledge because they were saying knowledge is power. Knowledge opens up a different realm. The knowledge takes you to higher self. They were talking about Atma Jnanam, the Brahma Jnanam, and the knowledge was held in such high esteem. And the Brahmachari who came to teach us at the Chinmaya Yuva Kendra was a big proponent of knowledge. And he kept mentioning to everyone, saying that knowledge purifies. If you have any questions after the Yuva Kendra class, feel free to ask me. And me, being me, had lots and lots of questions. And one of the first questions I had in my mind was this particular usage, this connotation, which was being in my mind for a very long time without any answers. What will four people say? So after my first class, I went to him and I said, I've been exposed to this particular expression for a very long time and I still don't have an answer. Can you help me out? Then this particular brahmachari smiled at me and he said, all these years, what you were doing is you were looking for answers outside. You were seeking answers outside you, looking out, and you couldn't find the answers. Now, what you do have to do is you have to change the perspective. You need to change where you're looking at. Instead of looking outside, look inside. This is a core philosophy of the Sanatana Dharma, the ancient religion in the world. When every other religion tells you to look outside, most of these ancient religions, especially the Eastern religions, in particular the Sanatana Dharma, kept telling you, look inside. Whatever you see in the macrocosm, you can see it in the microcosm, which is you. Every answer you are looking for is available inside. So instead of looking out, when you look inside, you would realize who those four people are. And these four people are none other than your antakaranas, your manas, your buddhi, your ahankaram, and your chittam. So when you look at the screens here, the words that's been shown in the chest level are the Sanskrit words, and around the hip level, you can see the closest English translations. Manas is mind, buddhi is intellect, ahamkara is ego, chitta is memory. So whenever our usage was going, what will four people say? It's these four people are the people who embody the manas, buddhi, ahankara, and chitta. And these are the four people inside you. So anta karanam. Anta basically means inner and karanam means being. So anta karana means inner being, or karanam also has another synonym called instruments. So anta karanam can also be said as inner instruments. So these are the four inner instruments we have: the ahankara called the ego, the buddhi, the intellect, the chitta, the memory, and manas, the mind. And what really happens here in Sanskritam is such a divine, polished language. Finding an appropriate meaning or a synonym to a particular word in Sanskrit and finding it very equivalent to any other languages, especially English, is very difficult. because a lot of time the gist of the meaning, the thrust of the meaning, the usage of words, the depth of the meaning gets lost when translation happens. That is why for Sanskrit words, every Sanskrit word you pick, could it be dharma, karmam, papam, punyam, ahankaram, buddhi, chitta, manas, you cannot find an equivalent English word. So what we try to do in these cases is we try to come with the closest word. For example, we call ahankara as ego, buddhi as intellect, chittam as memory, and manas as mind. But they are not the, but it doesn't capture the essence of the meaning that this beautiful Sanskrit words are conveying. So since the whole communication is going to be in English, so we are trying to use the most commonly used words, but still remember that this is not a correct representation of the Sanskrit words that's being used. And also, when you look at these antakarana, the inner instruments, we always have a thing, is these things are intangible. So there is nowhere in the body, or even if you go to a dead body or a cadaver and ask this doctor, can you quickly show me where the intellect is, or where the mind is, or where the memory is? It's very difficult because these are not tangible ones. These are not objects, and it is very difficult for someone to objectify what it is. You can point to a brain or you can point to a mind. Sorry, you can point to your brain, you can point to a heart, but pointing to a mind or a memory or an intellect is very difficult. So as we go through these slides, we will try to capture the essence and we will try to ponder more on it. And we will also look at how these things came up, how these items evolved, and what are the reasons we have it there, and why do we say that we need to look for this. So basically, whenever we heard the word all these years without knowing the meaning, what will four people say? What we try to do as a society is we were focusing on each one's approval or opinion. That's what basically the wordings meant. Or we try, so the teacher who was teaching me mentioned to me that instead of focusing on another person's approval or opinion, or conforming to the person's set frame of mind or the societal wishes, or fitting into someone's ends ideologies, or living up with some sort of a predefined honor system, we need to have a paradigm shift. We need to look at totally different, because we are not looking at outside. We are not looking at all the objects outside you. Instead, we are looking within ourselves. So the focus point is our own self. It's us. So instead of looking at others, let's analyze each and every question which we say. Let us analyze the action and the deed which we are performing. Let us constantly strive to improve our inner instruments, the antakaranam. And you would wonder, why should we do it? The reason our scriptures say, which we'll be going into depth in the next few slides, is to improve your Icha Shakti, your desiring power, your Jnana Shakti, your knowing power, and your Kriya Shakti, your acting power. So this Icha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, and Kriya Shakti can take us to a total different level. So that is what we are going to look in the next slides to come. So as we looked into it, Antakarana, the inner instrument, has got the mind, the manas, the intellect, the buddhi, the ego, the ahankara, or memory, the chitta. And there's something very beautiful in all these four functional names. When you look at all the four functional names, there is something basic. There is a common thread through all these four. And this common thread is called thought. So before we go and analyze what a thought is, let's quickly recap, which we already know, the five senses which we have: the taste, the hearing, the sight, the smell, and touch. These are the basic five senses every human being has. Then, based on the five senses, we come up with something called as Jnanendriyam and Karmendriyam. Jnanendriyam are something that gives input to your jnana to by the help of indriyams, the sense organs, which, so the jnanendriyams are the eyes, which gives you the sight. ears from which you hear, tongue, the taste, the nose, the smell, and the skin, the touch, and the feeling, and the sparsham. And this is what we call a jnanendriyam. And let's quickly look at what karmendriyam means. A karmendriyam consists of mouth, hands, legs, organs of excretion, and organs of reproduction. So with this basic information, let's start to go deep. So with that information, let's look at what mind is. Because Vedanta clearly says mind is nothing but a collection of thoughts. Every thought comes to you, and a collection of a series of thought is what mind is. Because the mind uses every reference point as a thought and just goes back in time. And the beauty of this mind or manas is the manas or mind is very restless. Because each time when you some sort of an issue comes up in your mind, you always starts thinking about the pros and cons. Like, can I do it? Should I do it? Should I not do it? Why don't I do I really have to do it? Or if it's any question, the mind is quite wavering. It's very difficult for the mind to stay at one location. It's just like a pendulum. It goes to this side and that side, and it keeps shuttling like a ping pong ball. It's very difficult to control the mind. So that is why even in meditation, all these learned people would tell you your mind is like a monkey. Imagine what happens to a monkey. A monkey is bit by a scorpion and it gets drunk. So that's how you are, highly energetic. You don't know what to do. You are so restless, you can't stay in one location. So that is a quality of the mind. And what happens with the mind, it gets all the input from the jnanendriyam and the karmendriyam. It gets excited due to the stimuli that comes into it, and the mind goes in its own run course. The mind is a seat of a lot of emotions, doubts, impulses, feelings, restlessness, and indecisions. So that is a characteristic of a mind. And the mind, what it also does, it controls your sankalpam and your vikalpam, which the closest English translation would be your will and resolution. And this is the basic quality of the mind. And due to this, the mind gets a lot of agitations and it gets a lot of inputs coming from the other three antakaranas, which are located within us: the buddhi, the ahankara, and the chitta. So in Sanskrit, the mind manas comes is often represented as sankalpa vikalpatmakam manaha. So that is how the mind is being defined. Now let's look at buddhi or the intellect. The buddhi or intellect is a slightly higher version than where the mind is located. And the reason is the buddhi or the intellect, it controls the decision making. It is where all the decisions are made because you have lots of questions and lots of clarification, lots of doubts, lots of uncertainties coming from the manas, which the manas initiates and brings it up to buddhi. And the buddhi or the intellect, the faculty of reasoning, comes and proclaims a final decision. It's just like a judge. It self inquires it, it speculates it, it imagines, it evaluates the pros and cons, and based on that, a final judgment is given by the buddhi, which we call it as intellect in English. So, whenever we have quite a lot of doubt, the buddhi tries to clarify it. And sometimes what happens is like when the buddhi gets really doubtful, it consults chitta, the other antakarana, which we call it as memory. And similarly, when buddhi comes up with some judgment, the buddhi always questions us. Is my understanding correct? Because that is why whenever you think you're done to the best of our ability, whenever you come with such a wonderful decision, after a few minutes, when you step up, when you look at from a different perspective, your buddhi or intellect will question it. Is it correct? Is it right? Should I have, did I overlook something? So those are all the questions or the doubts that come from the intellect. But most of the time, it is a final decision maker. So that is why in Sanskrit we call buddhi as nishchayatmika buddhi. Then comes ahankara. which we all know what it is because every one of us is embodied with this ahankara. As you can see it on this image, right? This person standing on top. It's this body, mind, and sense, which we think I am the body, I am the mind, I am the doer, I am the thinker, I am the enjoyer. It's I all the way because we elevate ourselves to such an extent with such sort of pompous attitude, everything looks secondary to us. That is the effect of ahankara. And we have lots of raga and dvesha, the likes and dislikes within us. So ahankara stores all these ragas and dveshas, and every activities or every desire which we willingly take, which we planningly execute, are all triggered by ahankara. Because ahankara would say, oh, I need to do this, I like this, I don't like that person, I don't know, I shouldn't be helping him, I should be working against him. So every raga or dvesha gets amplified and gets executed by the ahankara. So the action, the reaction, everything is established by ahankara, and the ownership of the thoughts and even the actions are from ahankara. So that is why in Sanskrit we call it as ahankarta ahankara. Such a beautiful meaning for that. Then the last of the antakarana is the chitta, the memory. So the memory is the location where the power of retention is. And this is where we store all the information on a long time retrieval basis. And any memory that's been written or logged in the chitta is always free from doubts because these are all arriving there after quite extensive, decisive conclusions. And that is one of the reasons that our Vedantic scriptures always equates our chitta or memory to a perfectly still lake. Because from this chitta, from this memory, if a mind has any questions or if a buddhi or an intellect has any questions, it is always able to address it. And this chitta or memory is not just the storehouse of all the stuff which we have learned during this lifetime, but our previous lifetimes as well. So that is why when people say in Vedantic scriptures that you meet a person on the street, the moment you look at this person, there is some sort of an attraction between you and the other person. You try to mingle them, and you have a feeling that you have met this person somewhere else, but you're not able to recollect it. And you're sure that you're not met it in this lifetime. There's some sort of a lot of past life impressions being stored in it. Similarly, when you meet someone, even though you have not even introduced, you have a sort of an aversion towards this person. Again, the past life impressions. So all these stuff are recorded in our chitta. A lot of this information are not easily accessible, but it's all there. And this is what that creates our individuality. So this is how we can, in short, explain chitta. And now we covered all four. We just covered chitta. And the way the Sanskrit meaning for chitta is anusandhanatmikam chitta. So we covered chitta. Prior to that, we covered ahankara. Then we covered buddhi. And we started with manas. So manas, buddhi, ahankara, and chitta. These are all the four antakaranas within us. And now we know what the duty of, or what the responsibility, or what the role of each antakarana is. So the beauty what the is when you sleep at night, when you slowly fall into a deep sleep mode, the manas, the buddhi, and the ahankara, they all merge into chitta. So that is why when the Vedantic scriptures say, whenever you sleep, you are creating a sort of a pralayam in your mind. That pralayam, what they are referring to, is where your other three antakaranas are merging with the fourth one. The buddhi, the mind, and the ahankara merging with chitta. Because every human being goes to a pralayam, and Lord Brahma goes to a pralayam after one particular yugam. So the whole yuga starts, and this is how the cycle of time is being stipulated or explained in Hinduism. So we just looked at what happens when we go into a deep sleep and how all the mind, buddhi, and ahankara merges with chitta. And imagine when the alarm rings in the morning, the chitta stirs up. And the moment the chitta stirs up, it activates the manas, the buddhi, and the ahankara as well. So everything gets active. So you're back into your daily rut, you're back into your daily go. So this is how the antakaranas behave, especially when you go into deep sleep, and from the deep sleep, you go into the waking stage. And when you look at this wonderful theory in Hinduism, eh, the whole body is made up of 5 sheets. It's called the food sheath, the Annamaya Kosham. Then you have the pranic sheath or the Pranamaya Kosham, which we call it as a vital air sheath. Then comes the Manonmaya Kosham, which is called the mental sheath. Then comes the Vijnanamaya Kosham, the intellectual sheath. And finally, the Anandamaya Kosham, the bliss sheath. And the moment when you go over the sheets, you see the Brahman. And these particular sheets, every sheet can be equated to a particular gross body. This and the gross body, the Stula Shariram, is a sort of a mix of Annamaya Kosham and certain parts of Pranamaya Kosham. And that is where the whole waking stage is. Then comes the Manomaya Kosham and the Vijnanamaya Kosham, which becomes part of the subtle body or the Sushma Shariram, where the dreamer or the Sapnam stage is. And then the Anandamaya Kosham comes at the final end, where the causal body, which is the cause of it, where it causes the other 2 bodies to exist, where the Karana Shariram, and that is where the deep sleep or the Shushupti is. So when we start looking into the mind is nothing but a collection of thoughts. It is the doubting element, as we all know, and the mind is very active, or mind plays a main role in the Manonmaya Kosham or the mental sheet. And when we look at the intellect, the determining factor, the factor of intellect which is slightly subtler than the mind, mainly gets involved with the intellectual sheath or Vijnanamaya Kosham. So this particular 2 charts, which I wouldn't be going into depth here, talks about all the gross elements and the tanmatras which we have. And we'll come back to it if we have time. And these are all the tanmatras which we can look into it from different subtle bodies. But let's look how it affects. So now we know the little bit of basics. So now we'll go into the deeper meaning of it and to the practicality of it. So imagine a person who's sitting there calm and serene, who's been meditating. His mind is as still as a calm lake. And in this calm lake, a tiny droplet of water falls. Waves or ripples start to happen. And these ripples slowly start from the center where the water droplets falls, and it goes in a concentric circular manner. So there is a little bit of disturbance caused in the calm waters. This movement of water is equated to a still mind, and the water droplets that's falling here is equated to a thought. So when the thought comes and hits on your mind, the mind which is calm, serene, still starts having ripples, starts having movements. You hold this little bit of turbulence there. The one thing which you were thinking was calm, quiet, and going smoothly starts a little bit shaky. So these kind of movements in your mind due to the thought, just like a droplet of water falling on the lake, is called vritti. So vritti basically is just a movement or the ripples of disturbance upon the calm waters of the mind. So imagine, we just mentioned that mind is nothing but a collection of thoughts. So imagine you have lots of thoughts in your mind gets really agitated, and the mind gets swelled with the thoughts. There's a lot of thoughts. This is very similar to a wild river gushing from the mountains. There's a huge amount of water there, and the water is coming out with such a tremendous energy. And coming from the tall, it has got a high flow, and this particular high flow is totally uncontrolled. It comes through, it hits at all the rocks. Any big rocks, it starts to erode. Any small rocks, it tumbles. Any medium-sized rocks, it gets pushed off slightly, and the water starts gushing down with very high velocity. The same thing happens to our mind as well. If you have lots of thoughts, if you have lots of uncontrolled thoughts, the mind gets quite agitated, the mind gets quite wavery, and mind, as we looked into it, by default is wavery. It keeps shuttling from one direction to the other direction because it is very difficult for the mind to come to a one particular conclusion. It hits both sides like a ping pong ball. And that is how the Vedantic scriptures equate the flow of thoughts in a mind to a flow of water coming from a wild river, like you see on this photograph, gushing down with so much of tremendous speed. It is very difficult to control it. And look at this particular picture. On the left side, you see a river meandering all around, going slowly, curving up, flowing so smoothly in a very laminar flow. And that is how it looks when you have your mind in a controlled fashion with an amount of thoughts which you think can handle, which you can control, which you can guide through the way. And on the right side of the photograph, you see small river banks, some concrete river banks, which looks like steps, 4 or 5 steps. In Vedanta, these river banks are being equated to your buddhi or your intellect. Because what happens is like the buddhi or the intellect is just like a river bank. It does not allow the water to swell and go to the other side. When the water keeps wavering, when the wave goes here and there, the two banks on the both sides, which have been shown as a concrete banks here, the intellect in a typical mind, it controls the water flow and it directs us to the right path. So that is how the buddhi, the intellect, helps mind to control the thought in a uniform manner, controllable manner, predictive manner, which we can assimilate and use it for a human progression. So that is the beauty of the mind and the intellect. So imagine, right? So Swami Chinmayananda's favorite example is here. Look at this picture of an office scenario. So you see around 7 people working there, and the guy in the front row, the middle guy, the guy wearing the white shirt, sitting in front of a typewriter. Imagine if he's a mind, and his real role, he's just a clerk. And what's his real role as a clerk? This is a story of Swami Chinmayananda. I'm just quoting it verbatim. Is his role is to receive all the incoming letters, sort it out, and give it to each subject matter specialist sitting on all his offices. But imagine a case where this particular clerk, instead of doing his job of assigning and distributing these papers and these letters to different subject matter experts, he tries to address each and everything himself. He's not capable, he's not sufficiently qualified, but he thinks he is. So instead of giving it to the rest of the other staff, he addresses it himself. So this is what happens when the mind takes an overriding rule and starts to act without invoking the other three antakaranas, the ahankara, the buddhi, and the chitta, to its benefit. Because the mind thinks the mind knows everything, whereas it doesn't. And the mind starts getting agitated, getting excited, and at the spur of the moment starts thinking, oh, I know everything. And the bad swell of this ahankara comes in and the mind starts to do the work. Then it realizes it's too late. So this is the same problem that happens with all the human beings. We don't give a second thought. We don't look to see what's the buddhi or intellect is saying, or what our chittam or memory has to say past, based on the past experiences. So this is how wrong a mind can go. which we often experience in our day-to-day life. And there are a couple of impurities in our mind as well. So these impurities can be broadly classified as the impurities coming from the body, the mind, and the intellect. The impurities coming from the body is called malam. Basically, malam is basically means impurities or any contamination that could come. It could be internal to the body, external to the body, or due to this relationship with the body. We look at these impurities and it clouds our decision in making a sound judgment. And similarly, when the impurities come and reflect to the mind, it's called vikshepam. And the closest translation to the vikshepam is something of a superimposition or a projection. So look at the picture here, right? It looks like a rope. When somebody tells you, "Oh, is it a rope? Doesn't it look like a snake?" Then suddenly your mind wavers and says, "Oh, it's true. I can see the scales there. Oh, it looks like a snake. Maybe it is a snake." See, because you're superimposing the snake on the rake on the rope, and you're projecting it, and your mind for a minute goes into this Vikshepa mode and thinks that is the case, whereas actually it's not the case. Then from an intellectual perspective, the impurity that binds us is avaranam. Avaranam is a beautiful Sanskrit meaning, which the closest meaning which you can find in English is veil or covering. Because the truth or the fact is being hidden by a veil. Just because the truth is being hidden by a veil, you're not able to see it. Just because you're not able to see it, the intellect sees whatever I see it is truth. If I don't see it, it's not true. So that is the avaranam. So these are the three impurities that binds a mind: the malam from a body perspective, the vikshepam from the mind perspective, and the avarana from the intellectual perspective. So that is why when you look at all our Vedantic scriptures, especially the Upanishads gives a lot of emphasis, a lot of prominence to the mind. The one thing that stands apart, one of the beautiful quotes which I have read comes from the Amrita Brindu Upanishad. It tells, Mane eva manishyanam karanam bandha mokshayo. As the mind, so the man. Bondage or liberation are in your own mind. That's a very beautiful saying. As the mind, so the man. The bondage or liberation are in your own mind. Because whatever your mind can accomplish can easily accomplish. In our last presentation, we looked at what vasana is. And here we will be talking about samskaram. So there is a subtle bit of difference between vasana and samskaram. So vasana is all the inert energies and everything we have acquired over the past years, which lies dormant in a very seed format. That is called vasana. So the vasanas are the ones that gets carried over from birth to birth, and that determines, that gives us our individuality, that gives our likes and dislikes, what we need to do and how we do it. All our things mostly are coming from vasanas. And whereas samsara basically is nothing but when you imagine that vasana is a seed and you're putting the vasana in a soil. So these vasanas, the seeds can remain in the soil for a very long time till the natural ambient conditions are present. The temperature, the moisture, the humidity for the seed to germinate. So that is how the vasanas are. The vasana stays embedded within us for a very, 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 very long time. Maybe this whole lifespan or maybe in the next lifespans. But when the appropriate conditions, when the suitable environmental conditions come in, and when these vasanas thinks, oh, good Lord, I have all the things that I need to grow, the vasana, the seed slowly sprouts out. As you see on the image on the right side, the small plant comes out from the seed. That's called samskara. So that is a little difference between the vasana and the samskara, which we will be looking into the next slides. So just want to touch base with it, vasana and samskara. So look at the word samskara. It's a little tricky and it's a little different, but in the next slide, we will be looking at a different word called samsara. It's not samskara, it's samsara. So samsara, as we have seen in our last presentation, the demystifying of karma, which we are equated like a hamster in a wheel. because we just looked into vasana and we said that the vasana is nothing but the experience stored in our memory, which contributes to all the latent tendencies of the mind, where the mind tells us to do this, this, and that. It just comes up and does it. And vasana, as the word convey, is means fragrance. So every human being has got their own set of fragrance. Every two human beings are not the same. And this fragrance emanates from all the things which we have accumulated from the past. And these vasanas give rise to desires, and the desires give rise to action, and the action give rise to thoughts, and the whole cycle follows again and again and again. Whereas this samsara, S-A-M-S-A-R-A, means samyak sarati iti samsara. That which keeps moving constantly is samsara. And that is what all these religious scholars talk about, a hamster in a wheel, because we think a hamster in a wheel, we go around the same, doing the same stuff. Punarapi Jananam, Punarapi Maranam. We go through the bondage, this life, again another life, the multiple set of life like a hamster in a wheel. And this, what happens is like the raga, the attachment gives rise to shoka, the sadness, and from shoka, sadness, we get into a deluded mode, and again that gives back to raga, the attachment. So the cycle keeps continuing, continuing, continuing constantly. So that is why samsara is called as samyak sarati iti samsara, that which keeps constantly moving. The only way to get out of it is atmajnanam. So that is why when they talk about this antakaranas and the mind and what we need to do, our scriptures talks about arishadvarga or shadripu. So basically, this is nothing. The words may sound a little bit cumbersome, a little fancy, but don't worry about it. This basically talks about the six enemies of the mind, which we have read it in multiple books and articles. Kama, lust, krodha, anger, lobha, greed, mada, arrogance, moha, delusion, matsarya, jealousy. So these are called the six enemies of the mind. And the thing what we need to do is we have to trespass, or we have to cross over these six enemies of the mind. So the moment we do it, we attain moksha. So that is the beauty of the samsara and the vasanas, and how to control the mind and the antakaranas. And that is one of the reasons whenever we look into the tuning of the mind, because once you control the mind, the other three antakaranas follow very soon. It's very easy to do it. And that is why controlling the mind is given so much of prominence. And that is why when you look into it, they all tell you every each and every time, right? Tune your mind to the higher self. Tune your mind to God. Because once you tune your mind towards God, it helps you to go for moksha or liberation. But what happens is like when you go and attach your mind towards earthly things, when you start going down, you get bounded, or you get into the fancies or the circle of samsara. And what happens when you go into the circle of samsara is the mind goes into the circular method, and the ego kicks in, and the raga and the dvesha, which are born of likes and dislikes, develops attachment, and getting the mind out is very difficult. So to get the mind out, they always say the mind needs to be made self-prakasham. So self-prakasham is self-effulgent. Very simple word meanings, which we commonly see in Sanskrit and all the rest of the Indian languages, swayam prakasham, self-effulgent. And the moment you're self-effulgent, it helps you to have a complete dissolution of the mind and effacement of vasanas. Slowly you're able to dissolve the mind, and slowly you're able to control the vasanas, and one fine day you will be able to slowly efface it or remove it. So this process of dissolving the mind and effacement of vasana is called mano nasham. So the moment the mind becomes self-prakasham, we are proceeding towards mano nasham. And one of the easiest ways to do it is through vicharam. Vicharam is inquiry. And that is how the knowledge in Sanatana Dharma are held in very high esteem. Every religious scripture of Hinduism, be it Bhagavad Gita or Upanishads or any Puranas, always starts with a questioning mode. because seekers will question the learned souls, and the learned souls will teach the information they have seen as a drishta of the Shrutis to the students. And that is how the whole information is practiced. And once we do a vicharam, we slowly start to do jnana abhyasam. Jnana abhyasam is basically you're doing some exercises through knowledge with the only sole reason to quieten the mind by removing or controlling the thoughts. This is where the Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam, and Dhyanam comes in. You're listening to it, you're reflecting to it, you're absorbing it, and you're meditating it. It's very simple. Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam, and Dhyanam. And this is where the Malam, Vikshepam, Avaranam of the mind slowly gets removed. The mind slowly gets into the Vivekam mode, the discrimination mode. It gets into the Vairagya mode, the dispassion mode. Then you start learning into the Sama, the mastery of the mind, and Dhamma, the mastery of the senses, and slowly progress. So now with that perspective, when you look at this wonderful picture graph, which we have been seeing from kids, the Gandhi's three monkeys, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, it makes sense now. So when we look at that from the perspective, and there is a very beautiful story in back in India, especially in southern India, which goes back when a lot of visitors come back. I'm talking about 300, 500 years back. We didn't have any water purification systems there back in India. So this particular story is being shown and comes from Atma Bodham of Shankaracharya. So when a lot of visitors come during a rainy season, all the water that they could collect in southern India would be the rainwater, and the rainwater, due to by its nature, would be very muddy, as you can see. So what happens is that when the rainwater is muddy, back in those olden days, they used to put kataka flower seeds. They will crush it, and all the flower seeds will be put on the small jar of where the muddy water is collected. So what these seeds or the crushed pollens and the flowers of this kataka flower do is they form a thin film on top of the jug or water. And what they try to do is they have a quick surface tension, and with the surface tension, they completely clog, create a huge membrane on top. And the membrane, when it starts settling on the top, it becomes a tiny film, and it starts to capture all the floating impurities. The moment it starts to capture the floating impurities, that film gets thicker, heavier, and it slowly starts to come down by gravity. So within a day, as you can see in the four glass jars, the whole film that's been staying on the top slowly comes and settles down. And when it settles down, it brings down all the mud, the impurities the monsoon season has brought, and making that particular water, the top 90% of the water in the jug or a pot, safe to drink. So this Kartika flower is widely used back then. I'm not sure if people are using it because of the technology has completely changed. So our Vedantic scripture tells the Shravana Mananam Nididhyasanam has to function like a Kartika flower. You just smear it on your brain, on your mind, and allow it to create a nice film. And this film, when it comes down, as it clears the water, it will clear our mind with all the bad thoughts and intentions. And any deeds which we will do out of it will automatically get suppressed. So this beautiful concept is also mentioned in a different angle in the Karma Yoga chapter of Gita, as we can see it, where Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, he talks about the Chitta Shuddhi, the mental purity. And for that, Lord Krishna tells, for to do a Chitta Shuddhi, you need to have Chitta Ekagrata, the single pointedness of the mind. And how do you do the Chitta Ekagrata? You do it with the steadiness of mind, Chitta Naischalyam. And when you do it, you reach Atma Jnanam. Once you load Atma Jnanam, you are into the way of moksha. And this particular concept is called Chidagasham. So the concept of Chidakasham is also very beautiful. It's because what happens is, imagine you are in a cube where one particular person is inside it, is completely sealed. So the person, what he sees is he sees only what's inside the cube. He breathes in that same air and he lives in the same air. And one fine day, what happens is, like, there is the glass break, and the air starts to circulate. And the air inside the cube merges with the air outside. So this is a very simple exercise. One can easily visualize it. But the meaning, look at it from a Vedantic perspective. So what happens is like you perform sadhana and you perform yoga. It could be bhakti, karma, or jnana. Then you slowly try to overcome all the barriers imposed by your body, your mind, and your intellect. And when you do it, the conditioned consciousness, that is us, the human beings whom we think, oh, we are so special, we are very unique, we are so and so and so, we try to merge with the universe. Then we realize we are no different from the rest. Every living creature you see around is your own self, and you merge with this unconditioned consciousness. So this is a very beautiful example, often explained in our scriptures, and this concept is the Chitakasham. So to summarize, when you look at the Antakarana process, they have the cosmic consciousness, which is gets reflected from an Advaitic perspective in ourselves, and we are nothing but the cosmic consciousness called the Chitta, or the individual consciousness. And the individual consciousness is comes and gives it to rise to Buddhi. From the Buddhi, we have the Ahankara, and from the Ahankara comes the Manam. And the Manam, or the mind, is expressed in Jnanendriyam or Karmendriyam. So the lower you come, the more grosser you become. And the higher you go, it gets onto the more subtle level. And that is how the Pravritti Marga and the Nivritti Marga are explained. So the Nivritti Marga is a path of evolution where you are just crossing out everything. You are elevating yourselves, neglecting all unwanted things. Then you are on a path of evolution towards Atmanyanam. Whereas on the Pravritti Marga, you are on a path of involution where you get attached by Maya and materialism. And very few individuals on Pravritti Marga have attained moksha. So now you would say, you talked about the mind, you talk about Dantakaranam, you talked about all the intricacies allowed in the mind, how we could elevate ourselves from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Chitakasham, the Kataka flowers and all the stuff. Why are we saying all these things? How does it relate it back to what would four people say? So imagine when you look at this particular picture on the top left corner, you're seeing a baby. This baby is being born. The baby comes with a lot of vasanas in mind, and as we looked into this picture, the vasanas will give rise to samskara. The moment the child has samskara, the child will have its own innate individualistic characteristic. And when the child slowly starts to grow, becomes a little infant and goes into the toddlers, goes to school, the youth and the age, it keeps gathering its influences based on its samskara, its surrounding, what's been taught and everything. And the child or the youth or the adult creates its own, or his or her own swabhavam, the character. This swabhavam, what happens, it affects the people close to him. The spouses get affected, the children get affected, these qualities are getting transmitted to them. They learn something and the swabhavam they share, and the swabhavam of the individual person gets slowly mingled and becomes the swabhavam of the family or the unit. Then what happens with the Swabhavam or the family or the unit is, when this unit becomes very strong of a particular family, the small characteristics and of behavior characteristics of that family will start to percolate and will affect the neighborhood. When it starts to affect the neighborhood, the samskaram of the hamlet or a group of houses in the neighborhood or a small village will get changed. And when the samskara of the village or the hamlet gets changed, the village gets changed, and slowly the surrounding villages gets changed, the states get changed, and the samskriti of the nation gets changed. And this is how the whole thing is getting affected. So that is why when our elders used to say, what will four people say? They were saying that instead of looking it out of yourself, or outside for the four people, look within you. See how you could change yourself to a better person. be a better family, be a better neighbor, be a good citizen, and be a global citizen. So this growth affects the individual macroscopic mi- human being and also the macrocosm or the world and the surroundings we live in. So that's one of the main intentions the Hinduism had, so that it would help us to lead a life for the betterment of the society, so that not only us, every other living being who's dependent on us also gets a chance to elevate ourselves for a better world. And when you look at from the outskirts of everything, the beautiful Nirvana Ashtakam or the Atma Shatakam comes into my mind. This is a prayer by Adi Shankaracharya. He was only 7 or 8 years old. He walked all the way from Kaladi in Kerala to the banks of river Narmada, close to somewhere to the Indore city in India, more than 2,000 kilometers. And when we walked there and when he saw his teacher, Govinda Bhagavad Pada asked this little 8-year-old, 7-year-old boy, who are you? And the first sloka Sri Adi Shankaracharya says is Mano Buddhya Hankara Chittani Naham. Nacha Shotra Jihve, Nacha Grana Netre, Nacha Vyomo Bhumi Natejo Navayu, Chidananda Rupa, Shivoham Shivoham. I am not the mind, the intellect, the ego, or the memory. See there? All the four antakarnas are there. I am not the mind, the intellect, the ego, or the memory. I am not the ears, the skin, the nose, and the eyes. I am not the space, the earth, the fire, the water, or the wind. On the first stanza, we looked at Antakarna. The second stanza, we looked at the Jnanendriya. The third word, we looked at all the Panchabhutas. And what are we? I am the form of consciousness and bliss. I am eternal, eternal am I. So this is how the whole emphasis of the wonderful concept of our Sanatana Dharma was reinforced again and again. But unluckily, most of the elders back then could not explain the intricacies or logic of it. But once you dwell deeper into the Sanatanic world, when you start looking into the deeper and deeper meanings, you realize every word they uttered had a very deep meaning, a significance. Maybe they were not able to explain it back then, but it has such a wonderful meaning. So with that note, I will end today's presentation. So what all I learned are all from Swami Chinmayananda's grace and his books and through his disciples. And I have not said anything mind-boggling or something totally of my own. These are all the things which has been taught to me. I'm just sharing it with you. So there could have been some mistakes. So please excuse me if there are any mistakes. So with that note, I will end today's program. And we have less than a minute. So not sure how many questions we can take. So if there are any questions, do let me know. Hari Om.